So by complete chance, or being at the right place at the right time, I was asked to perform in a festival called Immersive Mixtape. Performance was at Iris Cantor Theater, and they have a 56 speaker setup. I wanted to go over some aspects of this performance in case it helps anyone in the future. So previously, when I did a spatial audio performance, well, the only time I did it was at Satisfy in Montreal. And when I did that performance, they gave me a spec sheet with everything I needed. So there was the XYZ locations of every speaker. There was even AED, which is azimuth elevation distance. There was all the angles. There was a 3D mapping of the structure. Like any info you would need, they had it. And now it's the second time that when I ask for this information, like where the speakers are located, I can't get an actual spec sheet. I get a sort of approximate speaker location view from the top. That's sort of a venue spec sheet, but it's not necessarily made for spatial audio. So I wanted to go over how I built the speaker structure with not a lot of information to allow me to specialize sound and perform this festival. So first of all, I went over the speaker outputs. I had most of them, but some were missing. And also I was trying to understand what these FF speakers were. And from looking up on internet, I found it was called like something like front fill. So this is to fill out the space where the main speakers, which are the left, center, right, are lacking. These didn't have the output number on it. So I assumed the output number based on the fact that usually the subs will be the 4 last channels. So I got the output number that way. Yeah, so the reason why I'm mapping all these speakers is because I'm recreating the structure in XP4 Live to allow me to have the movement of sound of the speakers, but also have control over the room's acoustics. Having a virtual speaker setup allows me to shape the reverb, shape how the sound reflects. It allows me to position the sound so it's perceived as coming from inside or pointing at the outside. It just gives me a lot more control. So after I had all the outputs and checked out the sort of technical sheet, I decided that I was only going to use the middle subs. For spatial audio, I don't think you actually need to specialize the bass frequencies. And just to make it easier for me, I decided not to use the 4 main subs and only use the 2 center subs, which I thought made sense if you're using the outer structure speakers to spatialize higher frequencies. So I didn't have any actual distances of the room, and I had never been there before. The audio engineer sent me the angles for the speakers. I assumed this was based on the mixing position. So I did have a general idea of the angles for the speakers. They told me that the top 4 speakers were directly above, which doesn't really make complete sense. Like, it cannot be 90 degrees. So I had to sort of assume those angles. So that was my elevation. Then to calculate distance, what I did is I decided that the sweet spot for the specialization would be the center. So I took the 4 top speakers, I made an X between them, and that became my center spot. Yeah, I should say that I did this in a GIMP, which is sort of like Photoshop, just so that my lines would be straight. And there's also a measurement tool that allows you to calculate the angles, which would be the azimuth. So took the 4 speakers, made an X. That's my center point for every measurement for the rest of the structure. Then I started placing guidelines because I assumed there would be a sort of grid at the ceiling, and so the speakers should be in line. So I was just trying to imagine how the room is without ever seeing it, and that I thought made sense. So I took guidelines in the GIMP, which is like Photoshop, to trace lines between speakers to sort of create a grid. And that allowed me to have specific crossing points at each speaker. And then I took my center point and dragged it to every speaker to find the angle compared to the center. That's called the azimuth. So after doing all that, that meant I had, while calculating the angle, I was also calculating the distance. And because I didn't have any measurements for the room, I calculated it in pixels. I figured that distance doesn't really matter as long as it's the correct proportions. So when I was dragging from the center line to each speaker location, I was calculating azimuth, distance, and I already had the elevation from the email. And then I sort of assumed that the top speakers would be about 75 degrees or something like that. Like it wouldn't be a perfect 90, so that my structure would make sense. I put all this information in the speaker structure design tool, and that automatically gives me the XYZ. Then I looked at it and I sort of normalized all my data. So I inputted the AED, but then I looked at the XYZ and sort of tried to make things straight because I assumed that they would be on a grid. So I did that and sort of made it nice so that it would make sense. And that ended up being way too big for the template. So then I exported that as a TXT file, because speaker structure for XP4 Live or for Max can be inputted or exported as a TXT file. And so I took those numbers and I started scaling them until I had a structure that made sense visually in XP4 Live. So having all that allowed me to do the structure, and then I just started spatializing sound. I'll go over how I spatialize sound or create all these different paths from one sound source another time. So I had my structure, and then I arrived at the venue, and I realized that my structure didn't make sense with the actual place. I didn't anticipate that it would be sort of like a theater that goes down, and so I was correct in assuming that the angles were from the mixing position, but then the front fill speakers were actually under zero because the room goes down. And also I realized that the height, like not all top speakers were on the same grid. It was sort of the left, center, right speakers were a bit below the higher structure of the small speakers. But at that point I didn't have time to redo the structure and stuff, so I decided that I didn't care. And during the sound check, the spatialization was actually very nice, even though my structure compared to real life was wrong. The only thing that does is that it's as if the space was stretched in some parts, so the reverb isn't, the reflections are not 100% accurate, but it was way enough to make something enjoyable for the audience and for myself. So I left it like that, and I'll fix it later and make it available somehow to future performers of that room, so that at least they have the actual structure to perform with. And that's it. That's how I created the structure. That's how I created the speaker structure with not that much information, just enough so that I could perform. And in the end, I think it was very nice. It was only my second time performing in that in a room of that size for spatial audio, and it was my first time creating a speaker structure for a show, and I hope I can do it again. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon. Bye.